All right, I'm really excited to be doing this episode because one of my sort of day jobs in years past was working with teen moms, new, young, parenting, sometimes as young as 12, 13, 14, all the way up to 21 years old. And I know that becoming a new parent was difficult for many, if not all of them. A lot of what you do revolves around the topic of parenting. So, if we were to bring the listener as much value as we could today, what are some things that we would have to do to accomplish that?
Yeah. So, parenting. So I think one of the things that if I could get one thing across today, to parents, it would be to just ask yourself this question when you're making decisions on how you're going to parent, whether that's day to day or big picture kind of parenting philosophy questions. It's is this is what I'm doing, is this decision, is this decision best for shaping my children into the kind of people that I want them to be? Or is this trying to get them to do what I want them to do in the moment, right? What is the goal? And if I can help parents to have the perspective, the long-term view, and just not get lost in the struggle of the day to day, then I would have succeeded.
It reminds me of a phrase that I often use when I'm struggling on a different context, but the idea of my own goal setting, motivation, kind of feeling stuck or uninspired. I'll ask myself, I'll go on a walk and ask myself the question, what will my future self appreciate that I do today? And so that seems like a similar way of explaining that. It's a massive topic. We couldn't possibly tackle all of it on this episode. It's definitely one of those infinite lifelong games, maybe. But we have to start somewhere. So in terms of the brand you're building, for lack of a better term, peaceful parenting, how do you define what that means beyond kind of the obvious that the word peace is in there?
Yeah, so peaceful parenting is it's based on the idea that parents should give kids the respect that they deserve just because they're humans, right? And so just like we would treat any other human with respect, we're also going to treat kids with that same respect. So even though we're bigger and stronger than our children are, we're not going to use that to force them to doing what we want, via punishments or consequences or other things like that. But as much as possible, peaceful parents seek to model good behavior, model doing the right thing, and reasoning with our kids as much as possible.
My wife's currently overseeing a summer daycare program for children and youth. And she was sharing just last night that she was overhearing some parents talk with their kids, and it was making her want to step in, but didn't really feel that it was her place. And also, in both cases, those parents came to her afterwards, super apologetic, like, sorry, my kid is not behaving. In terms of being able to reach the people that you want to reach, because you may not get to know that woman who was standing in the hallway yelling at their kid yesterday, or the one that I saw just last week. Like, how are you going about reaching this audience?
Yeah, so kind of what I'm doing, online specifically, is I'm putting as much value out there as I can. I've read, I don't even know how many parenting books I've listened to. I don't even know how many thousands of hours of, podcasts on parenting, and now I have two kids of my own, and I've learned so much. And as I'm learning it all, I'm just like, man, there's just so much useful, actionable, practical advice out there, and just tips and help that so many parents, if they just made these like small changes, it would make such a big difference. And so that's kind of what inspired me to get started talking about this kind of stuff on the internet. Is man, if people just knew these few things, it would make such a big difference. And so I'm just trying to share all these things that I'm learning, all these strategies, all these frame shifts, all these mindsets, and yeah, that's where I'm coming from.
And who would you say within that group, like parenting is a broad topic, but broad's okay. When you picture someone listening, let's say to your podcast, or if you were to share this exact episode with someone specific, or when you say that you're sharing online, like when you think of that sort of, to use an annoying business term, but that client avatar, the person who's the ideal listener, who comes to mind for you?
Yeah. I mean, I'm helping people, or I'm targeting kind of new parents, people that are just getting started. Maybe they have small children, but also just kind of also parents that were raised use they were raised being punished, in a punitive environment. They were raised maybe with being, you could say, mistreated or even abused, and so they don't really have a great handle on what good parenting looks like because it wasn't really modeled for them. But they want to do better. They know they don't want to do what their parents did, and they know what they want to do better, but they might not know exactly what they should do, what they do want to do. And so I'm kind of trying to step into that gap for a lot of people that are wanting to do right by their kids, but they just need some practical help along the way.
Simon Sinek says we should start with why. We're, roughly 6 minutes in, but I'm curious why this is such an important mission for you.
So I didn't used to always be a peaceful parent. I was myself raised in a punitive environment, and I when I first heard about peaceful parenting, I was skeptical. But one of the things that kind of changed my mind is the data and the studies that have been collected in regards to parenting. It's very clear, very compelling, and very one-sided. And so all kinds of negative outcomes are connected with, they're called adverse childhood experiences. So that includes verbal abuse, physical punishment, which includes spanking, and a list of other kinds of ways kids have negative experiences. Another one is divorce, and so the data is very clear that kids that experience these adverse childhood experiences, they are at increased likelihood of experiencing things like depression, drug use, having dark thoughts, and even there's one statistic that is like kind of blows my mind still when I think about it. But children that experience 4 or more of these adverse childhood experiences, they on average have a life expectancy of 20 years shorter of a life than someone who experiences none. And so it's, you can compare that even to smoking. Smoking shortens people's expected life expectancy by 10 years. So this is twice as big of a problem as smoking. And and a lot of people, they are painfully underinformed on parenting, and they don't understand that there's a lot of harm they're doing and counterproductive things they're doing in parenting, and they're just a couple small tweaks, couple ideas that they could be exposed to, and it could change everything for their kids. And so it really is a huge deal, and it makes all the difference in the world to these kids.
Something that I don't know that I've ever shared on this show, certainly it's come up when I've been on other people's podcasts and whatnot, is that our oldest daughter, if you look at the ACEs chart, lights up almost all of them from her early years. She was born to a drug addicted, homeless teen mom. and suffered from a lot of trauma at a really young age, moved around foster homes, etc. We end up adopting. And so a lot of our work over the last 8 years has been to kind of repair attachment and heal the brain from the damage that was done in her very early years and in utero. And so I'm very familiar with ACEs. The other thing is that my day-to-day work over the last nearing 20 years has been supporting youth that are in jail, hospital, addiction centers, and school for teen moms, homelessness, group homes, crisis. And I guess you could split the hospital into mental illness as well, eating disorders. But either way, that kind of like audience, that group, that community of youth who really struggle. And to your point, so much of that can be mapped back to those adverse childhood experiences. Now, this is, I know, a really fun episode for us to do because since I have that experience, I didn't have to do like as much research with those like specific topics, and I'm excited to kind of nerd out about parenting. But I don't want to lose the audience and the people who might be kind of new to this sort of stuff. So I'm trying to make sure that we don't have that curse of knowledge and that we're able to kind of talk through some of these topics. You mentioned that part of why you started sharing value online was because you had this light bulb go off where it was like, oh, if only people knew these few things, that we can actually make big change with a small-ish number of things to learn. And I think that's a really important thing to point out, because when we think of the topic of parenting, like I said, it's an infinite game. It feels like it can be way too big to kind of take on and to learn. Maybe let's say your kids are already 6 and 8 or something, and you're like, damn it, you feel a bit of guilt for the way you've parented them up until this point, and you feel like it would be too much to try and change now. What do you say to someone who's struggling with that thought?
I mean, I don't need to tell anyone, the better, the earlier you can improve things, the better, of course. I mean, prevention is always better than cure, but if it's been a little bit, of course it's still worth doing the right thing. I mean, and I think what you can do if your child is old enough, is, an apology can go a tremendous way. And even if your child is a grown adult, if they were parented in if you did hurtful things to them, which every parent does to some extent, but if you've said hurtful things and those things, there's a good chance those things have stuck with them, and still they think about them sometimes, and they still blame themselves for some things. And so one thing that can make all the difference in the world is owning up to what you've done, and saying, hey, I need to apologize because I treated you this way and that wasn't okay, and it had nothing to do with you. It wasn't your fault at all. You didn't do anything to deserve that. That was on me. I should have done better. I could have done better, and I didn't. And I want to offer a heartfelt apology, and I just want to ask you how you're doing. And I want to find out how I can make this right. I want to, if it's appropriate, I want to get you therapy to work through this. I'm going to take classes to make sure I never do this ever again. I'm going to make amends. I'm going to make it right. I'm going to make sure no one else in my life makes the same mistake that I did. And I want to make sure that you definitely don't make the same mistake that I did, right? And so I want you to understand why I made that mistake, what was going through my mind, and just help you be free from the burden that I might have given you.
That is definitely something that can be helpful, ending that sort of generational cycle, the passing down, and that can happen at any point. When we talk about the things that you're making amends for, people would probably be listening and be like, what are these two guys even talking about in terms of those sort of actions, or those things that parents do that they need to make amends for? So there's obviously the big T trauma topics that can be a little difficult to discuss, but just in general, some of those like parenting cliches, or as you put it, that the way that we were raised maybe is not how we want to raise our kids. Like, what are some of those things? Let's just go right back to the like examples, or if we listed off some things that you often see parents who aren't doing the peaceful parenting, like what things are happening?
Yeah. So of course there's the big T trauma that we don't need to go into. That's probably obvious enough. But I mean, there are things. There's spanking. There's raising your voice at your kids. There's taking away privileges. There's timeouts, punishments. Just not listening. And that's one of, and I can kind of get into why my personal perspective in regards to parenting is that all kinds of punishments have some intrinsic problems with them. And one of them is that kids, when they're punished, they aren't listened to. The parent is saying, I already know the problem here, and I already know the solution too. But oftentimes the parent is simply assuming the problem is one of motivation. And so they're going to offer a punishment in order to motivate that child to just get it right next time. But so much of the time, the kid already wanted to get it right. They wanted to do the right thing. But for some reason, that didn't happen. Whether it's a skill problem, whether it's there were other things at play that the parent doesn't realize, or, it could be a lot of different things. But yeah. Those are some of the things that could have a lot of negative effects. That it might be obvious that raising your voice at your child could be harmful, but maybe it's not so obvious that that other kinds of punishments are actually counterproductive and can even lead to the exact problems you're trying to prevent.
I was going to say, raising your voice, I think, is one that would fall into that category of light bulb going off, possibly for someone on a walk right now listening to this episode, being like, oh, I do a lot of that. How have you come across the research? Like, what have you learned about that topic? Because that probably is one that's pretty common, that you think you aren't really being too unpeaceful, I guess, in terms of your parenting.
Yeah. So the reason that the problem with raising your voice is it's really a act of intimidation. So it's almost like I use the metaphor of, a lion is like roaring, trying to like scare its prey, scare the other animals around it. And so it's saying, hey, I'm bigger, I'm stronger, just do what I say, or else. That's kind of that's kind of the implied message there. And what we want for our kids is we want them to do the right thing because it's the right thing. We don't want them to do the right thing because they're avoiding being punished for the right thing, or because they're afraid that they are going to be yelled at for doing the wrong thing. Right? We want kids to understand why it is a good thing to do the right thing. We want them to understand how their choices and their actions make other people feel. We want them to, you could say, all right, I'm gonna give you I'm gonna yell and I'm gonna raise my voice. Like, what were you thinking? That was such a terrible idea, Or you could say, like, hey, after you did that thing, did you see your sister's face? Did you see how that she looked kind of sad after you said that? Right? And so that's another thing with raising your voice with punishment, is that you're taking their attention and putting it on themselves. And you're saying, look at what you've done. Look, that was bad of you. But what we could do is we could help them focus on others around them. And we could say, hey, look, look how other people are feeling right now. Look how your choice impacted them. And not even in a judgmental way, but, did you notice that your sister didn't like that when you said that? And so those are a couple things that I would point out about raising your voice.
Shame, guilt, and compliance are such vicious cycles. I, in a previous episode, had Daniel Matte on the show. He was the co-author of Myth of Normal with his dad, Gabor Matte, and he shared a bit about how funny it is. It's probably not the word he used. Interesting, perhaps, to people it is that his dad is a doctor who talks about trauma, attachment, and parenting, has written multiple books on the topic of both that and addiction, and yet they had very strained relationships many times. And it wasn't until adulthood and his dad started to recognize some of those parenting failures, I suppose, things to learn from, things to repair, and they started attachment. And I'm not sure that they went as far as going to therapy together or anything like that, but learning about the topic and explicitly working on it together to repair the bond between adult child and dad. And that worked wonders for them to this point. Anyways, they have at least one book co-authored. I think there's a second one coming, and it's a pretty beautiful story. But to me, it's also really important to share stories like that because it shows that this isn't just for like bad parents, that it's pretty much for everyone, including an absolute world-class expert in parenting. And I just kind of wanted to put that out there because that whole idea of shame and guilt reinforcing itself would make it hard to learn these things. And speaking of it being difficult to learn peaceful parenting, if there were prerequisites or let's say you were teaching a course on this topic of peaceful parenting, and either the first module or before people started the course, they had to kind of have a few prerequisites, or actually, let's just say it would be ideal for them to have a few prerequisites. What are some things that really best prepare people for learning this stuff?
Intro to peaceful parenting. It would be, I'd really want to hammer home a couple things. So one is that before you can make any progress into peaceful parenting, you need to first accept that the parent has really 100% responsibility in how their kids turn out and over their children's behavior. Now, I suppose that's different if you're adopting or fostering or something, but let's just say if it is your own child, when you can take 100% responsibility, you can stop blaming the child and you can really say, okay, there's a problem here. And it doesn't necessarily mean my child is being bad. It doesn't necessarily mean they chose a malicious choice. There's something that I have chosen to do that has led them to do this, whether they're reacting, whether they're thinking, maybe I'm not getting enough attention. Maybe the only way I can think of to get attention right now is to do X, Y, or Z, to pinch someone or bite someone or something. And it even goes as far to say, like, even genetics, like the person you choose to have a child with, you're choosing part of their genetic code. So even the genetics doesn't escape the responsibility, right? So, and you can say when you take that full responsibility over your children, you can really take ownership of who they are, who they're turning out, and that actually it takes the burden off the child. And so now the child doesn't have to have this burden of, well, I am bad, I am mean, I am, and when they believe that about themselves, they it can be a self-fulfilling prophecy, which is not one we want them to have. And they they start to live into that identity that we've given them. And so, yeah, taking ownership. And so if you can say that the child doesn't deserve to be punished because they're not the one deciding who influences them, they're not deciding the one who is modeling their behavior, right? They're not deciding what school they go to, who their peers are, what they see on TV. All those decisions are made by the parent. And if it's not the child who chose all these things that influence who they are and who they become and what they do even, then if you can understand that, then you understand why it's not really a fair thing to punish them, right? It's either, if they're misbehaving, it's either because something has influenced them, whether it's their parent or their environment or their peers or their grandparents or what they see on TV. Either it's something in their environment influencing them, or it's innate to them, right? It's something just built into them that they had absolutely no choice over. And, in no other circumstance in our world do we punish someone for something they haven't chosen. I mean, think about it. Like, can you punish someone for what gender they are? Can you punish someone for what race they are, for how tall they are, for what, eye color they have or something? Like, no, of course not. And so if they are misbehaving due to something innate, well, then it's still not fair to punish them. And so that is the number one thing I would want parents to really own, really understand, and just grab with two hands, is that, parents have 100% responsibility over who their children turn out to be.
When you say that there's always something impacting it, one of my favorite parenting authors, because I haven't read your book yet, is Daniel Siegel. And he says that if a kid's really struggling, they are either hungry, hurt, tired, sick, or stressed. They just are. And a lot of times as parents, when we're in the heat of the battle, we're in these moments and we're maybe tired ourselves, our batteries are a little bit drained. Remembering that kids aren't doing something just because they want to is definitely one of those little hacks that I find really helpful. I've supported a lot of parents, certainly even more teachers, and in that case, you're working with other people's kids, coaches, similarly, in trying to help them learn some of these things over the years, because they're easy to learn via textbook or book or even seminar, maybe podcast. But because they're a little bit tipping into that experiential specific knowledge realm of once you practice it, it's going to be a lot easier. It can have a pretty big learning curve for people as well. And so sharing that hack that they're either hungry, hurt, tired, sick, or stressed, just reminding yourself that in the moment, and that in all likelihood, unless you can feed them, or you can remove the splinter from their foot, or you can give them a nap, or all of a sudden cure their illness, or in the moment remove their stress, you can't really do much. Your hands are kind of tied in that moment. So disengaging can oftentimes be just as helpful if a kid has kind of flipped their lid and is really struggling, in that moment. The one thing at the time you probably could help with a lot, that brings us back to the raising your voice thing, certainly consequences and stuff, is reducing stress. That's another thing that I remember being really helpful when I was early on in my learning about parenting and teaching journey, was the idea that if you can reduce stimuli in that moment, it can go a long way. And I saw this just yesterday. I felt so bad. I was like, oh, I wish I could help the daycare workers at my daughter's daycare, just with their sort of skill set around this stuff, because they were trying so hard to help this little guy who was in the hallway throwing a huge tantrum. And they were trying by continuously talking. And I could tell they were about to start talking. And every time they went to say something, I was like, oh. And I was walking down this really long hallway, and I just knew it was going to escalate and escalate and escalate. And all that kept going on in my head was disengage, disengage, like sit a comfortable distance away. Don't be higher than them, intimidating. Like you need to pull out all the stops right now, or else this is going to end up in like a real fight or flight type situation. When those things happen, of course, a lot of times it's sit in the hallway. You've been bad, so you're going to sit by yourself for 10 minutes. I'm going to take your toy away, go to your room. You're not having ice cream after dinner. No movie this Friday. The list goes on and on. Raising your voice was probably a bit more of a blurred line, like someone listening being surprised by that. I think with consequences, people might be a little bit less surprised, but it's still such a classic thing. So let's chat about that one a bit. What have you learned when it comes to the reason that you say that things like punishments, consequences, timeouts are not helpful?
So consequences and punishments. So if I could define that real quick, that would be like trying to take something away or somehow cause a child to feel unpleasant, to feel worse. It's a negative experience in order to try to motivate them not to do that thing in the future because they remember, oh, that was negative last time, right? And so there's some problems with that. And so a big problem, and I kind of touched on this a little bit before, is that when you give a consequence, you don't teach the child why they shouldn't do something. You're just telling them that they shouldn't do that thing. And, the child probably already knows that they shouldn't do that thing. And so then it would just not be helpful at all. I mean, like the classic line people say is, go and think about what you've done. Go to your room, think about it, and think about what you'll do next time, right? And, how many kids go to timeout, the timeout corner, the step, or go sit in their room and they say, you know what? That wasn't a good decision that I just made, Actually, next time, I think I'll do this instead. Or, man, I sure feel bad about how I was treating that other person. I think I'm going to go apologize after. Like, kids, they don't say that. What happens is they get mad. They get frustrated. They're thinking, oh, gosh, I just hate that this just happened. This was unfair. He started it. All these things. And so, yeah, it can be counterproductive in the sense that so another example is if you're trying to teach your young child not to take toys away, and then you, as punishment, you take their toys away, right? It's just hypocritical, and you're actually modeling the exact behavior you don't want them to do. Or some parents who use spanking as a punishment for kids hitting people. It's lessons for kids are much better caught than they are taught. How you're modeling behavior is much more important than what you're saying about how the kid should behave, right? The whole do as I say, not as I do. Kids are always watching, they're always listening. And if it's like trying to teach a child to speak Japanese, but you only like kind of know Japanese. It's just not going to work out well. Like, no matter what you say, every time you point out that they got something wrong, they're just not going to be fluent in Japanese if you're the only one teaching Japanese and they don't and you don't speak it that well. And so we need to be fluent, metaphorically, in good behavior. We need to be virtuous people ourselves. We need to be doing the right thing, showing them that we are resisting temptation. Oh man, I sure wish I could have that cookie right now, but I know that's not a good idea, and that it's almost dinner time, so I'm not going to have it. Like, showing them that we can have self-control, that we can restrain ourselves. And modeling is like one of the most powerful tools that parents have. And so, there's a couple problems with consequences and punishments.
Yeah, we can flip it a bit too. A lot of times when I've shared this sentiment, people have had a bit of a light bulb go off, and it's that let's treat the situation from like a project management sort of lens. I come into your school or your house and I'm trying to help you be a better parent. And I say, okay, we want to figure out what's going on here. And if we're busy using consequences, I guess we could get into rewards afterwards, but let's say consequences and punishments for now. Either way, those external motivating things, and someone says, oh, finally, they're not swearing anymore. And I say, well, yeah, but you told them they couldn't play Roblox every day for a week until they stopped swearing. And they had the external abilities enough to do that. They're so scared shitless of not playing Roblox that they're not swearing now. Oh, great. That's another terrible lesson to learn. And you get into the situation where you get so lost in what the correlations are. And so a lot of times I'll say, try to standardize as much as you can. The classic version of this that pisses me off so much is schools removing things like art, music, and of course, sports always being the main one to go when a kid acts out because, oh, well, if you can't behave, quote unquote, in class, then you aren't allowed to play hockey. And like, we've become so surrounded by these sort of cliches that we don't even realize how problematic that is. And as we are talking right now, there's probably daycares and schools impacting millions of kids like that just today alone by creating this consequence. And then all of a sudden, they start behaving in class. Possibly that takes some higher order thinking on the kid's part. But if they do, then they get to play hockey again. And if they don't, then they're still not playing hockey or football or whatever the consequence was. And so that kind of misunderstanding of like why the behavior sort of stopped, I think, is another thing that we often get wrong when it comes to that stuff. I definitely have some questions about sort of the brand you're building and what some goals you have are. But before we move away from like the kind of step by step, I use the example of if you were to package this stuff as kind of a course or to teach it, what are some things that you would mention? I think that was really helpful. The not raising your voice, not using timeouts or consequences, understanding where behavior comes from a little bit. What are some other things that are kind of in that solar system of being a peaceful parent?
It's easy to say, don't do all these things. Don't raise your voice. Don't use timeouts. Don't spank. But, it's also, of course, equally important, if not way more important, to talk about what parents should do, right? And how do you shape your children into the kinds of people that you want them to be if you're not using, negative reinforcement. And so one of the things that I teach parents, I'm a parenting coach. And so one of the things I'm coaching these clients through, these parents, is I'm kind of teaching them how to collaborate with their children to solve problems, right? And I do like that choice of words, collaborative problem solving. And kind of how you do that is it's all about listening, when there's you can call it a misbehavior. I like to frame it as you have an expectation that they're not meeting. Because that's kind of a little bit less judgmental, less assuming that they're in the wrong, right? And so if you have an expectation that they're not meeting, and especially if it's a pattern of behavior, this is happening, it's over and over a couple times at least, then we can ask them and we can say, hey kiddo, I've noticed that you're having trouble, brushing your teeth at night. What's going on, buddy? And just listening. And if they were younger, you might need to ask, a bunch of follow-up questions and more pointed questions and less open-ended, but really figuring out where they're coming from and not assuming they're doing anything wrong or assuming anything about their motivations, but just asking. And maybe if they're younger, you can kind of play the guessing game. Is it this? Is it that you don't like, this toothbrush? Is it that that means it's bedtime and you don't want to go to bed, you want to stay up later? Like, what is it? And so once you figure out all the information, then we move on to explaining concerns. And so it's saying things like, these are my concerns if you keep not brushing your teeth, right? So if you don't brush your teeth, your breath is it's going to smell bad, and people around you are not going to want to be around you anymore. And your teeth they might turn yellow after a while if you don't brush your teeth and you're eating sugary things. And that's going to be really embarrassing, and you're going to get cavities, and you're going to have to go to the dentist. And so explaining all these natural consequences in a way that, in an age appropriate way that they can understand, and explaining why those consequences would be unpleasant or bad or negative. And then the third step would be, okay, so how can we make sure you don't get any of these negative consequences that I just explained, but how do we also address the underlying concerns and the reasons that you were doing this in the first place? And it can be really simple, like it could be, the kid just really didn't like the new toothpaste flavor that we switched to, right? And so just saying, brush your teeth or else doesn't actually fix the problem that they just didn't like this toothpaste, or, so figuring out what the problem is, explaining why we don't want them to keep having this problem, keep not meeting this expectation, and then working together with them to find a solution that they're happy with. And if they can agree to a solution and they're part of the decision-making process, and they can say, hey, actually, I'm not happy with that solution because of X, Y, and Z, well, then now they're much more likely to actually keep that deal because they were part of the deal-making process. It's not just a unilateral mandate that the parent is just giving them, just do this or else. Now they feel heard, they feel like their concerns were listened to, they feel validated, and that's kind of the general approach that I recommend that parents take in order to kind of solve like what to do instead of just what not to do.
That's beautiful. And one of the things that I'd like to add on that kind of unfortunately would drag us a little bit back into the what not to do, but I think it can be handy for a split second because it brings us right back to what you were just sharing about the collaborative problem solving approach, is that a lot of those behaviors in the moment were impulsive because they didn't have the ability to get outside of that sort of deep rooted animalistic reactionary brain and be able to have those types of conversations. And that is another thing that I think can be so hard, but can be a binary fix for people as parents if they recognize, oh, wait, okay, we're going to have this conversation, but we're not going to have it now, because the only way to have it now is to try and scream through their screaming, or maybe you're lucky and you get some words in, but they're not able to hear in that moment too. It's so hard to put ourselves in the shoes of, or mind for that matter, of a dysregulated kid. And I'll stick with the positive too, because I was going to ask, well, if we use the power and intimidation, we use some of those bad things, the adverse childhood experiences are pretty specific. What are some of the impacts that has long term? Now, maybe a better way to ask it then, because let's stay on the smiley face side, is if we are using some of the peaceful parenting, what are the positive results that you've seen?
On the positive side, you would say that they are having empathy. They're aware of the effects their actions have on others and how those choices make others feel. They are intrinsically motivated. They're doing things that they should do because those are valuable things to do, because it makes sense to do them, right? When you punish, you're just teaching them to do things because they want to not get punished. But if you help them understand why they should do those things, now they have a motivation. And so, yeah, intrinsic motivation. And then they're not blaming themselves. They're taking responsibility for their actions. They are when you model healthy behavior, naturally they become healthy individuals. When you model functional behavior, they go out and they want to marry someone else. You know, eventually when they want to have kids, they want to find someone just like their parents often to mate with. And then so ending that cycle really sets them up to positively keep the good cycle going, right? And so being a healthy parent really sets them up to not have any of those bad habits that, you know, so many of us have, and really create the positive cycle going from generation to generation.
It would be good to hear some stories, some experiences that you've had with this stuff. Um, let's go in kind of chronological order. First off, as a child yourself growing up, uh, what are some things that now that you know this stuff, you look back, and of course, we're not going to try and be blaming your parents or what have you. It could be positive, negative, anywhere in between. But what are some things that you can remember that looking back now, you've had to change how you see some of those things when you were growing up?
I growing up, it was I was spanked pretty regularly for talking back was one, or for antagonizing my siblings. And yeah, I mean, talking back, peaceful parenting has really changed my perspective on that. I mean, oftentimes it's just pointing out inconvenient truths for the parent, and pointing out that the parent is being a little bit hypocritical and saying, well, didn't you just say this and then now you're doing that? And then instead of actually considering, hey, wait a minute, maybe I did just do that, it's just no talking back, you know, here's a punishment. And that was really frustrating as a kid, you know, making oftentimes legitimate criticisms and then kind of getting lashed out at. And or now I lost, you know, for me it was taking away my PlayStation when I would act out or talk back or antagonize my siblings. And I just I do wish that, I mean, if I could go back and you know, talk to my parents, just say, hey, why don't you it would be great if you could just, instead of just punishing me for doing things, just kind of sit down and talk to me and ask me about my perspective and really figure out where is this problem coming from, rather than kind of just these band-aids, putting band-aids on the problem. Like, why don't we get to the core about where this you know, misbehavior, where this talking back, the criticism is coming from? Is there any nugget of truth in in what I was saying? Is there any reason I might have been acting out in those ways? And yeah, just if they could have had a little bit of curiosity about where I was coming from, that would have made all the difference in the world to me.
What a great way to put it, staying curious. The part of my brand with respect to just keep learning, a lot of people think that that has to do with education. Obviously it does. Or something like you might go learn new skills on Skillshare. Certainly it does that. Growth mindset, lifelong learning. But I often share a longer one, but it'll be, this is a very tiny story right now because I want to keep going on your stuff. But the idea, the actual genesis of that for me was out of mental health struggles and appreciating that once I take a learning stance in any relationship, that life gets better. And that's really where that kind of like hashtag, like I used to share that to people for the last 20 years, you know, just remind yourself, just keep learning, just keep learning. And then eventually I turned it into a blog. You shared the idea that a lot of times they're reflecting back, and that made me think of another little tip that whether we like it or not, our kids are oftentimes just mirrors, right? They have those mirror neurons. They're reflecting sort of our own emotions, our own tiredness. Actually, a lot of the things that I said earlier about being hungry, hurt, sick, tired, or stressed, as a parent, if you are one of those things, your kids are going to reflect that back. They biologically, physiologically, psychologically, it just happens. And at times, when I've shared that as a tip, I think people turn to guilt and shame and being defensive, not wanting to blame themselves in the moment. And I also feel like it's important to point out that none of this is meant to blame the parent, the teacher, the coach, because that's not going to be helpful either. But as you put it, as I just summarized, taking that learning stance is where you can operate with like continual growth in these areas without feeling the shame, guilt, and blame, but appreciating that behavior is kind of like a sign. A mirror can be really helpful when it comes to that. One of the things that I'm working on right now is kind of classic personal development / self-help genre book. And I was just writing today about how important becoming critical thinkers for ourselves is, and how much we don't realize, like a fish discovering water, we don't realize because we're so surrounded by what we've learned from our parents or the way we were raised. And at some point, we have to switch into taking ownership over our own actions, failures, decisions. Well, for that to happen for a child, parents have to be willing to recognize that we don't own our kids either, that they aren't property of ours, that we can't fully control them. And that happens, I speak from experience now, at a pretty darn young age, in some ways, kindergarten, right? They're going to start to spread their wings a little bit. So I would love to know, let's say if somebody wasn't able to access peaceful parenting, they're listening to this episode. Let me rephrase that. They didn't have peaceful parents themselves. They also don't have kids, but they're still a listener of the show. And you're able to share some things in that self-help book for teens that I'm working on that you feel like they should hear that maybe they didn't get because they didn't have peaceful parents. If that makes sense at all, I would love for you to share with that audience how you think they can go on still thriving.
Yeah. The number one thing that I would want these kids to learn is you were not a bad kid. There were a lot of things in your environment growing up that were completely outside of your control. Your parents or whoever was taking care of you did a lot of harmful things, if that's true about you. They may have hurt you. They may have said some things that stuck with you. They may have modeled really poor behavior. And we are designed to fit in with the people that we are raised around. We become just like the people that we are around. And when we grow up, for as long as we live in our parents' house, we are heavily influenced by them, even more than we would be by a friend or a roommate, because they're our parents and naturally we're bonded to them. We're looking up to them. They're our role models. We want to be just like them. And so if they're making mistakes and then we make mistakes just like those, that doesn't make you a bad person, because that's just how we're made. We're made to be just like our parents. And so if we want to break those kind of generational cycles, it takes a lot. It takes often therapy, reading self-help books. It takes insight, journaling, prayer, epiphanies, and it's an unnatural thing to shift a large in a big way away from how we were raised, but it can be done. And you were not a bad kid just because you were punished, just because people told you were a bad kid, just because they told you all kinds of things, doesn't mean it was true. And in all likelihood, you may have just been trying to survive, and you had to believe that to get by. You had to believe what they were telling you. Oftentimes, kids don't have the freedom to say, no, I don't think I'm a bad kid. And I think what you're saying about me is a lie. Like, volatile people will respond in volatile ways to calling them a liar. And so, yeah, it's a survival strategy to kind of accept what we're told about ourselves. And yeah, once you can be freed from that identity of I am bad, I was bad, now you can say, I think I'm actually kind of a good person. I'm improving. I can do really good things for the people around me, and in the future, if you have children, I can make them. They can be good people too, and I can be the parent that they need me to be.
You just reminded me of another really helpful thing for parents, and that's that when the kids do feel safe, if we're parenting the right way, we're going to get to see a lot of those negative behaviors, those struggles, those moments where they're dysregulated, they're tantruming, they're yelling at us, they're doing things quote unquote out of character. And I say this because that can start again the looking at yourself as a parent in a negative way, the blaming, the feeling shame and guilt, because you start to wonder things like, well, why doesn't their swim instructor see this? Why does their kindergarten teacher or their daycare worker or grandma or grandpa never see any of this? But they save all their bad behavior, quote unquote, for when they're at home. And that's just such a good sign, because at the end of the day, we cannot be perfect parents. And I'm sure that's why your brand won't be changing to perfect parenting anytime soon, because it's just unrealistic in that they are still kids. Their brains are still developing. They're not going to be able to not have behaviors that are I said negative earlier, but again, they're just signals of struggle, and those behaviors are going to exist. And so normalizing that part, I think, is really important to give parents permission and actually to celebrate in a strange roundabout way the fact that the kid feels safe enough to be upset in your presence is a really good pat on the back. And if you can kind of shift your mindset that way, it can be another one of those little hacks, those little things you might stick on your fridge to remember when times get tough. You referenced being a coach of parents already, so that's something that you're doing as part of the kind of business aspect of what you're building out here and your ability to serve and bring value to your audience. Do you have a success story or a story of growth, and you can keep it confidential, but that you can share that you've been able to see from doing some of this work with respect to peaceful parenting?
I had one client who had a 12-year-old son, and he the thing that they would run into was that they would have regular kind of shouting matches with each other. So we spoke a little bit about raising your voice, and I mean some of the epiphanies, they can sound so obvious from the outside, but I was asking him, yeah, your son is shouting with his parents, but are you guys shouting too, right? Like, haven't and that was kind of a light bulb moment for them, is that, well, maybe I've been modeling shouting for the last decade of this kid's life, and so of course he's going to be shouting right now, right? And we can't be asking our kids to stop shouting if we're shouting at them, right? And so sometimes it's just so simple. And I went through and I was teaching them and helping them. They would come back and we would talk about how it went, and talking about the collaborative problem solving, and just this kid, in a way, like he'd been lectured to, but I'm not certain that he had really ever been like reasoned with to on like serious important things. And so just starting that shift away from intimidation, away from power struggles and towards just laying down your weapons, saying, hey, I'm here to work with you. I really care about you. I'm going to refuse to escalate in any way. And I'm just going to listen to what you have to say. And if I have some expectations you're not meeting, let's talk about it, right? And let's find a solution that we're both happy with. And it's a complete, just a complete shift on perspective. And it worked really well for them. And it takes a long time for kids if they've been, shouted at and have been shouting for a decade at that point, I think. And it takes a long time to undo those habits, especially for the 12-year-old, but even for the parents, right? It's hard for the parents to change, but giving the kids some grace, understanding where they're coming from, that's what you've taught them. And just starting that understanding that I will not allow myself to raise my voice. If I ever raise my voice to you, please, I'm inviting you, I'm asking you, I'm welcoming, like, just let me know. Just say, you're raising your voice right now. You said you wouldn't do that. And then I will tell you, thank you so much. You were totally right. I did just start to raise my voice. Thank you for telling me that. Let me try again. Let me rephrase. And that's it worked. It worked well for them.
We don't want to add too much math to the situation that is a really like heartfelt, loving sort of thing, but being a little bit data driven, borrowing from business, art, and sport a little bit. Another thing that if people are, and goes back to the prerequisites of being able to learn this stuff, if they're willing to engage in a growth mindset and improving themselves, then I think they can be ready to track a little bit too. And this is another thing that you'd be at risk of creating shame and guilt for, unless you are ready to realize, like, hey, I just want to be a little more aware from a data-driven perspective of this. And so something that people can do is, let's say on the perfectionistic end, start a Seinfeld streak. And so Seinfeld streak, meaning he used to share that his advice for people who wanted to get better at telling jokes and stand-up comedy was to make sure that you write a new joke every day and keep that joke going for as many check marks as you can, and you don't want X's. If you get an X, you just restart again. And this is all so funny because it's like the kid's potty chart with the stars going on their thing, but this is for the parents to be aware of. I did not yell at my kid today, check mark. If you're still growing into that, another way that we can borrow is from golf. And so because it's golf, they would say put tees in your left pocket, and every time you have negative self-talk, you move a tee to your right pocket. And you could start with maybe 18 tees, and because you're beginning, and so your goal is to, by the end of a golf round, still have as close to 18 tees as possible, at least only have moved 17 over and only have one left. But as you get better and better, you could remove them. Maybe you put 3 tees in your pocket for that round of golf. And so in our home, it could be coins in your pocket. It could be little gems or something. And every time you yell at your kids, you have to move one of those over to the other pocket. And it also, for me, when I employ any of those types of strategies, is just something that I think more metaphorically of in my mind. Like, if I'm having a tough week, okay, I'm aware that I just moved a bead from my left pocket to my right pocket twice today, and it's like the morning still. So I need to chill a bit, and just being a little bit aware of the data around that, I think, can be another little hack that adds to the toolbox of helping people. You mentioned collaborative problem solving, and that you have read a ton of books, listened to a lot of podcasts. Before we end up doing the rapid fire questions and signing off here, I wanted to make sure that I asked you, like, if there were kind of the top couple resources that you would point people to. Let's assume it will be your podcast, your posts, anything that you share on your website. But what are some other things that you've learned from, or heroes that you look up to in this space?
Huge one. One guy that's been talking about peaceful parenting for a long time, he actually finally just put out a book with the title Peaceful Parenting this year. it's his magnum opus on the subject. His name is Stefan Molyneux. Um, his book is Peaceful Parenting. It's a very comprehensive kind of philosophical, ethical, moral look at parenting, kind of looking at the data, kind of hammering down all the arguments, common excuses and questions about peaceful parenting, and arguments in favor of more aggressive or punitive parenting. That's an excellent resource. And then if you're if you're interested and you're wanting to get into this kind of collaborative problem solving, there's a really great resource on that exact topic written by Ross Green, who's a PhD, and he wrote a book called Raising Human Beings. And so he talks all about practically why you would want to be, solving problems instead of, punishing misbehavior. And he gets very practical and exactly what to say, how to say it, when to say it, all these details. That's an excellent resource as well, Raising Human Beings by Ross Green.
I appreciate you sharing those and look forward to the content that you put out in that area that continues to be helpful and really change lives. It's important work that you're doing. And speaking of that, in terms of like your wishes for where the brand is going, where the stuff that you're building and you're working on, like kind of your next steps, or the way that people could support you, or things that if we log off today, you'd be like, darn, I wish I said that about what your kind of own dreams and goals with this stuff are. What would you say to that?
Yeah, so kind of where I'm moving as a brand, and kind of business wise, if people want to support, or if they want to just become a peaceful parent, they're hearing about it, they're interested, they really don't know what that would look like practically, but they want to know what it would look like. I'm actually starting a community for peaceful parents, and it's going to have courses, mini courses in there about peaceful parenting. And the reason why it's a community and not just a course is because just parenting is something people just have so many questions about. I heard these principles, but what about this like particular situation? What about like when I'm changing their diaper? Can I force them to do it then? Is that okay? Or like all these questions. What about the gray areas? And what about when they're a toddler and they can't really reason yet? And there's all these questions. And so I want to create a space where people can ask their questions, and they have all these other people who are also peaceful parents that are saying, "Oh man, I just figured that out. This is the conclusion that I came to," right? And that's another thing, is that so many people are surrounded by people in their daily lives that are not exactly peaceful parents. Maybe they are a little bit better than how their parents were. Maybe they're less punitive, but maybe they're shifting from spanking to timeouts. Maybe they're shifting from, verbal abuse, raised voices, name calling, and they're shifting to taking away privileges, but still not quite peaceful parenting. Well, the community is a great opportunity to surround yourself with other peaceful parents and just have people to ask questions of. And so if anyone's out there that wants to learn about peaceful parenting, yeah, that would be a great place to learn all about it, and to be connected with all kinds of other peaceful parents as well.
I love it. If I can ever be of support when it comes to attachment around adoption, or how people deal with the education system as it relates to their kiddos, and struggles with intestinal issues, is another very big one close to our heart here in this home, that has led our daughter to being in the hospital a few times. And again, I wouldn't talk much about publicly, but I know that's a common struggle of parents with kids. Like, if anything in that community, I can ever serve and be of support to you, please do let me know. Or parenting in general, but it's always good to support parents, that's for sure. So I love to ask some rapid fire themed questions on this show. And we pretty well talked peaceful parenting, I think, for the whole time. A lot of times we hop around different subjects, depending on the episode and stuff. But in this case, I'll say that, things can certainly be off topic from all this, or maybe they're on topic, whatever you want. But the first question is always one thing that you are actively learning right now.
Man, I'm learning that you can learn all the theory you want, read all the books, but when it gets to the heat of the moment, sometimes you can do things, you can say things, and then later you're just like, what in the world was I thinking? And of course, it's not something I haven't learned before, but it's like, man, even in parenting, even in marriage, it's just like, where is this coming from? So I'm actively learning what I need to learn. Well, I'm actively learning that kind of self-reflection and just figuring out, where is this stuff coming from? Because it's got to be coming from somewhere. It's not random, right? So that's one example.
And as someone with parents, this question may carry some extra meaning, but if you could only leave one piece of advice for the next generation, what would that one piece of advice be?
Oh man, it would be connection over correction, right? It's not primarily about punishing badness in our children. It's about connecting with them, understanding where they're coming from, really get to the root of things, and really start there, listen, and solve the real problem. Don't just assume it's a problem of motivation, but really connect with them before just jumping to correcting.
That's awesome. And if you were to ask me one question, again, could be on this topic or completely off topic, but you get to be the podcast host for a few seconds and ask me a question. What's something that comes to mind?
Yeah. So what is one thing you've learned about parenting in let's say the last year, that has just been a big frame shift that you just didn't see coming?
A very positive thing comes to mind, actually, and it's that our daughter loves the idea of like creating on YouTube. Like many other kids out there, if you just gave her an iPad, she would probably consume it all day, every day. But has been as or more interested, given the right prompts, in like doubling down on being a reader. And this is actually something that surprised me in the last year, because I get to witness a lot of teenagers when I'm doing my work supporting youth institutions. And I've shared this with a few different people, which is in part why I'm writing this book this summer, is how much they're making this like return to reading, and how much they actually do want to pick up physical books and go sit under a tree and read them in a medium that we would consider like pretty old school right now. So I think for anyone out there who is thinking of sharing something with kids, like, don't lose sight of the fact that books are still, I could say like librarian voice, really important. It's like, yeah, okay. But from a lot of anecdotal evidence in my household, as well as many teens I've seen recently, they love going to the library and like getting that physical book right now. Something as a dad that has surprised me as well, that when you choose something to work on a kiddo with, and this is a big part of CPS as well, that you can't just pick everything to help your kid achieve at one time. You got to kind of either pick the lowest hanging fruit so that you can tackle it soonest anyways, kind of what's the money guy there that talks about the snowball method, like put all your debts in one spot or tackle the smallest one first to give yourself some momentum. Similarly, either you tackle that or you tackle the most, the biggest one, the one most important that's going to move the needle the most. That when we as parents try and help our kids solve a struggle that they have, a kind of a chronic, ongoing, difficult thing, and you're trying to shift that behavior for them, that things are often a lot more of a lifelong journey than we think. That sometimes we might think, oh, yay, we've sort of succeeded, and be ready to wave that like green flag of success. And then all of a sudden, a few weeks later, if you had let up on the habits and the systems and the supports that got them there, that maybe they are struggling with that again, So our daughter used to have nightmares and for the longest time wasn't. And then, they kind of creeped back in a tiny bit. She was liked to write the F word in different places, and we kind of curbed that one pretty well over time. And then just a couple days ago, not just in marker or pencil, but in nail polish, FUCK right across the wall in their bathroom. Like that, these things we try and accomplish, we can feel we've succeeded with, but that the underlying things that they struggled with to lead to that behavior probably still exist or can creep back in a little bit, which is the exact same for adults as well, And we've mentioned CPS so many times. I know that their catchphrase is kids do well if they can. Well, with these behaviors, we help them shift quite a bit so that they can, but then still there'll be times where they can't.
Yeah, I love it. Kids do well if they can. That's good to remember. And that reminds me, I heard this quote. I can't remember where it came from, but this idea that if, kids often, they're not giving you a hard time, they're having a hard time. And just having that moment of compassion for them, that this child is not being malicious. He's not doing this on purpose to ruin my day. He's struggling right now and he needs a little bit of love.
That's really well put. A great mic drop moment. And the last thing I'll ask is, I think you've done a good job of summarizing why. So where could people go if they wanted to learn more about and support your work?
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me on X at peaceful_tips. I'll be right there. Luke adds it. That's me.
Awesome. Well, thank you for taking the time to do this today. It's been great.
Thanks so much. This was great.
Boom.